Hey guys, welcome back. In this episode, I want to talk about how you can develop a competitive edge. And that goes for just about anyone that's listening. But for me, I wanted to have a competitive edge in terms of starting a business, the way that I thought. I don't so much look at competition. Like I would look at Alex Hormozy and I would look up to him and I'd be like, I want to get to that level. I don't so much see it that way anymore, but that's for another video. But this whole process that I want to talk to you guys about today is something you may have heard of before, but it's called biohacking. And this is going to be really light, so for those of you that have a wealth of information on this already, you maybe follow Dave Asprey or people like that, Brian Johnson, like this will be boring for you. But for those of you that are kind of new to the space, this is something I want to introduce to you as a concept that can help you not just start your business, but in other aspects of your life. So I have some notes over here that I want to share with you guys starting out. The first thing is, like, I'm not a medical doctor, I'm not a scientist. I've just accumulated a lot of these articles, and that's how I've studied journals and different things. I follow people like Max Lugavere who are super helpful in terms of synthesizing information in journals that are out there. Reading those publications and those dissertations and these journals is like not my strong suit. So finding someone that you can, follow along with and you understand will help you greatly. So for me personally, my journey started out a year ago, and it didn't start out really, like, my whole process of self-improvement really started in this one space. So biohacking is something I'm really passionate about. What happened for me is I have a half-brother who was diagnosed with early onset dementia. And it's changed a bunch of times, from Lewy body to Alzheimer's to all kinds of different things. And I don't know what it actually is today or where they landed, but he went from doctors to doctors to doctors. They tried to figure out what was going on. He's only in his 50s. And he's my half-brother. There's a big age difference. We live in different states. And so we're not super close. Like, we're just not super close. He's a great guy. He's really amazing. But so he's going through this thing. He's dealing with this early onset dementia. And it's like no one knows that. It's just like there's nothing we can do, right? So we think there's nothing we can do. And so I would spend a lot of time talking to my dad about this and thinking about what the impact was for me and what do I do for my brain, because I'm like, oh, it's just genetic, right? And so I started taking a more serious look at all of these various factors that I'm going to go over with you on. But that was really where things started for me. I started taking my brain health into account more. And it's really peculiar because when you look at the heart or you look at the liver or whatever, or the gut, right? Like, all of the doctors, that are respectively, they have practices that study those organs. They look at those organs. But for the brain, largely, with the exception of Dr. Daniel Amen, I really don't know of many people that are doing brain scans and testing supplements, or they're doing brain scans and they're testing, why someone has depression or whatever. Like, well, let's do a brain scan. Let's see why. And so there's not a lot of time spent looking at the organ and studying the organ. It's more like you go into a psychologist, they prescribe you a pill, and there's a whole stream of downside effects that can come from those. In fact, there's a really interesting video from Max Lugavere interviews a guy that's in the life insurance space, and the life insurance companies actually have a really good dashboard of what red flags to worry about, what things that are going to reduce someone's lifespan. So taking a thing like a statin for blood pressure or whatever, or for cholesterol pills, like those things, they're known to decrease lifespan. And so I'm not saying don't take them if your doctor prescribes them. I'm just saying get second opinions, do some research, understand things. But this was the genesis for me of understanding that just because we can't see the brain, just because it's not studied really thoroughly, you don't get pictures of it when you go into your doctor or whatever. You need to be thinking proactively about it until brain scans and some of these new technologies become more of the norm. So that's where I want to start. Number one, for me, something that I like to do early on is fasting. So I like fasting because for me and my family, I think metabolic, and I'll go into how I know some of this, but metabolic defects or metabolic issues are really prevalent. So for me, like I got a continuous glucose monitor, and I've actually had a couple of them. I got one for my brother, and so let me actually back up. I'm going too far. This summer I took my brother for 8-9 weeks, and he stayed with me. And so he's in a pretty advanced stage of dementia. And my goal was, the doctors have kind of given up on him. They're just like, oh, here's the things to do. There's nothing we can do. Take these pills. And I was like, I wonder if from diet and exercise and some of these things I'm going to share with you guys, if there's a way that I could help him, I could slow this progression down, or maybe there's some amazing way that I could help reverse it. And so I had spent this entire summer diving into the material, learning as much as I possibly could from everyone and from papers and articles. And so that's where I'm going when I begin at fasting. So for my brother, I was just collecting information. The first week or so was really like us spending time together to get to understand his history and what may have led up to this. And so for him, he used to call himself the carb dumpster, or I think that was his nickname, was the carb dumpster, because he used to eat cereal and pancakes and all this stuff. And I noticed with my own blood glucose and also with his, anything that remotely had sugar, so certain types of fruits and certainly breads and carbohydrates, which turn literally into sugar into your mouth. They don't even need to hit your gut before they're being metabolized as sugar. Those things had a huge impact in terms of spiking insulin. And spiking insulin, some level of it should be natural, right? Like in the wild, we would eat berries or whatever, you're going to have an insulin spike. So I don't want to just vilify, spikes out of context. However, you have to understand that, and I don't know all the details about this myself. There's some really incredible people out there that teach much better than I can on this. But when insulin is elevated in the system, the body doesn't have the ability to go into fat loss mode. So that's one thing. Also, little things for me, like something that blew my mind was when I had a high level of stress, when I was holding on to stress, my glucose would be at 150 or 160, which is like the equivalent of eating a donut, just from stuff going on in my mind. I could be in a fasted state and I could just be worried about something, and that would literally blow my glucose, for me, through the roof, considering that I was in a fasted state, there was nothing going on. So fasting has been really helpful for me. Everybody talks about this and no one explains it, right? So you hear about fasting window. That is the window in which you consume food. So this is different for everybody. I've done monk fasts, which are 36 hours. Those are a little bit harder for me. I've done 48-hour fasts, I think, at the longest. I'm drinking water during that time. I'm taking salts and electrolytes during that time. You want to be mindful of all of those things. We can go into that deeper in a future video. But fasting-wise, my window, I'll try to eat at noon, and then from noon to 8 o'clock. I know 8 o'clock's a little bit late, but for me, I'm a late night eater. It's something I'm still working through, but ideally you could do noon to 6. And it's really good. You give your metabolism a break. You go into autophagy, which literally I think in Latin means self-eating, and so your body goes through this process of recycling these old dead rogue cells that have minor defects, and it will break them down and repurpose them elsewhere. And so it's really good for your gut. It's really good to operate off of ketones. Ketones are a much more efficient source of energy for brain power, for cognition. So there are studies that show in people with Alzheimer's, they will stop responding to glucose insulin, and that's why they think the brain, these parts of their brain are dead. They can't recall things because they no longer respond to energy. Well, what they found is those parts of the brain are not actually dead. They will respond to ketones as an alternate energy source. But in order to operate off of ketones, you need to be in a fasted state. Again, there's people that know way more about that than I do, and I want to move on. So that's fasting. The next piece is diet. So everybody knows about diet. We could talk about it till you're blue in the face. I think the main things to be aware of are eating whole foods. I have a lot of friends. When my brother came up, he was convinced, he didn't know that eating Beyond Meat or whatever wasn't ideal for every single meal. Just because it's vegan doesn't make it healthy. Just because it's vegetarian doesn't make it healthy. Just because it's carnivore doesn't make it healthy. You want to be eating things that were as close as they would be in nature, and now you have the whole other level of what things are sprayed with glyphosate and all kinds of junky pesticides and hormones and whatever. You have to watch out for that too. And so that I will make a video on that later. But you want to be eating whole foods. I personally believe that a mixed diet of, majority of fruits and vegetables and some level of animal proteins, which have, have vitamins and minerals that are way more bioavailable than vegetables and fruits typically will. So I think there's a balance to eating both, and there's good things about eating both, especially for older people, that sarcopenia or like muscle loss as you age, that you want to be aware of. And I just don't know. I'm not super convinced that just a vegan diet is the way to go. If that's you, great. Like, I'm glad like that works for you. Everybody's got a little bit of a different gut lining, and this is the second part of diet that I want to talk about. So I've noticed that a lot of people like Jordan Peterson or whoever that claim all these benefits from the omnivore diet, a lot of times what happens is, in the research that I've done, is they have some form of leaky gut, or they have SIBO, or they have something. And so there's these probiotics, or their bacteria in their gut are offset. And so if I was to feed them a meal that I eat all the time, I've created this thing called a brain bowl. It's something I consume almost every day. Every ingredient in it has been selected for brain health. If I was to feed that to Jordan Peterson, and when I did feed it to my brother, they had a really hard time. Jordan would have a hard time processing it. My brother had a hard time processing it. And so I think a lot of people that are omnivore only, they need to have their gut repaired before they can, see any benefits from fibers and from polyphenols to the same extent that they would, if they had an omnivore diet. So gut health is super important. I'll end on that with this one fact from Google. I love this quote. So a lot of people don't realize, but your gut actually is like a huge source of neurons, right? So we know the brain has neurons and whatever. I just want to read this quote to you. I have to squint because it's really small. It's kind of long. But compromised of 100 million neurons, the network of nerve cells lining the digestive tract is so extensive that it has earned the nickname second brain. Known as the ENS, or enteric nervous system, this network of neurons is often overlooked and contains more nerve cells than the spinal cord or the peripheral nervous system. In the gut, more neurons than in the spinal cord or the nervous system. That is mind-blowing. And so you can do a lot of research on the gut-brain connection. All of this evidence is out there, but that alone is mind-blowing to me. Okay, so we talked about diet. I want to move on to nootropics and supplements. So for me, I've spent a lot of time in this space, and I'm not sure, let me just start by saying supplements and nootropics and vitamins and minerals, aside from salts and some core minerals, I don't know if you're going to notice instant changes. They take longer. They, just for me personally, and for a lot of people that I've talked to, they don't have overnight effects. So I'll just say that. Pre and probiotics, those are pretty immediate. So like, there are some people that have, upset stomach or weird issues, especially if you have SIBO or you already have gut issues. Probiotics and prebiotics will probably cause you to get hot. They'll probably, they could even spike your insulin or your glucose levels, actually is what I saw in my brother. And so it's hard. You have to know where you're at as a baseline, and you have to really research this stuff for yourself in order to get started. I'm not convinced that, I haven't seen amazing doctors talking about all this stuff outside of Mark Hyman, who I really subscribe to a lot of what he teaches, and he helped me get a lot of ideas to test on myself and see if things worked or didn't work. And that has helped me get to this point. So pre and probiotics are super important. Probiotics are those gut bacteria. Prebiotics are, I believe, what they feed on. Another one for me that did have immediate effects, like immediate night and day, and I'm going to talk about this later when we talk about sleep, but was magnesium. So I believe it's magnesium oxide. There are different types of magnesium. Some are more bioavailable. That can be problematic because for some people you might end up having diarrhea or whatever, so you want to be mindful of what you get. Oxide is very low absorption, so if you have, I think like 6% of it is extracted by the gut. So you're not going to get a whole lot of it, but it still makes a massive impact for me in terms of sleep, like way more than melatonin, which, would help me go to sleep, but then leave me kind of groggy. So magnesium I recommend. I think there's enough ample research between these next couple vitamins and brain health in general, so I'm just going to mention them. Vitamin D, definitely there is a deficiency across the United States, especially if you live in the northern part of the hemisphere and you don't have a lot of sun. There is no replacement for sun as far as I understand and as far as I've heard, but vitamin D is a good supplement to be taking. Vitamin C, we don't make it naturally. It's pretty easy to get. I mean, it's in strawberries, potatoes, and then obviously citrus. So if you're eating a good range of things, you might be fine, but you want to make sure that you're getting a little bit of vitamin C probably anyway. Vitamin B has been tied to all kinds of brain things between B12, B6, And so that's good. Omega-3s you will see everywhere, which is why my brain bowl, this basically like pudding that I've made, every single ingredient, like the top 3 base ingredients have omega-3s, high omega-3s. I do believe they're really important. Lutein and zeaxanthin, I think, are really interesting ones. Max Lugavere talks about these quite a bit, and there are a considerable amount of studies that even in younger people, like not adults, so like in kids and teenagers, like there are studies that show consumption of lutein and zeaxanthin improves visual cognitive performance. So the ability for these test subjects to respond to a visual stimulus quicker, I believe, is what the studies were getting at, and that they saw improvements even in younger people. It's not just for older people. The next one is caffeine and BDNF. BDNF is brain-derived neurotropic factor. I don't really totally understand it. It has been linked to as a nootropic, as a brain supplement, if you will, and it's not the same as caffeine. They do have a relationship, and you can find BDNF, I believe, in things like matcha and some teas. And caffeine, the consumption of caffeine, I believe, will release or increase the effects of BDNF, or kind of suggest it to propagate in your body. I'm not sure how all of that works, but I know that caffeine and BDNF have this relationship. So those two I think are good. Obviously in moderation, right? Like caffeine is, you will end up pulling salts and electrolytes out of your body, so you want to be mindful of, are you getting the correct balance of salts when you're taking caffeine and coffee in particular. I like matcha. I'll do a lot of iced matcha. In that, I will put things like MCT8 oil, and I don't know. I think it works for me, and it's something I enjoy. The last one that I have is ashwagandha. It comes up a lot, whether it's for bodybuilders or whether it's as a mood enhancer. It's an interesting one to look at. There's a lot of studies on it. I shouldn't say there's a lot. There's a handful of really decent studies on it that are noted pretty much everywhere and pretty much by every podcaster. So it's one that I would look at. The last 2 things I want to talk about in this high-level biohacking video, like we're not going into depth on any one of these right now, right? But the last 2 I want to talk about are exercise. I think exercise is super important. Obviously, when you're talking about brain health and brain function and things like dementia and Alzheimer's, a lot of these people have blood flow related issues. And so it's kind of gross, but you think about erectile dysfunction or whatever, these things that metastasize in other places, they could be indicative that there are blood restriction issues somewhere else. You're not just going to have it in one place typically, or it's not like you just have bad blood flow just in your hand, right? Like it's a symptom. There is a larger cause that it's probably due to, and so you want to investigate that. So with that, I eat a lot of things. I know I'm going back up to diet, but I eat things like beets and what else? Arrowhead. There's a type of, what's the leafy green that the Italians put on everything? It's peppery. I forget the name of it. I'll remember it in a second. But beets specifically have nitric acid, I believe, or whatever that component is called. Nitric acid, nitride. There's one that's converted in your mouth, and basically it helps blood flow. That's really important to me to be aware of blood flow. The other piece of blood flow is exercise, right? So I think cardio is a good thing to do. I don't do a ton of cardio. I'll just do my strength training workouts very quickly in repetition, and my heart rate goes up considerably high, like 180 or whatever, which is probably extremely high for my age and whatever. So I don't know if I should be concerned, but my resting heart rate is extremely low. So exercise, so strength training, and then also some cardio. I think that strength training is probably more important to me personally, just on the studies that I've seen in terms of muscles. So in men, as we age, and probably women, muscles tend to move towards atrophy, and so you lose muscle mass over time. Why is that relevant? It's relevant because muscle mass will help you metabolically when you eat something like a donut, or you have something that might spike your insulin. It helps spread that load because the muscles are able to absorb some of that insulin that's released from your body. So exercise is super important, and it's a great segue to the last one, which is sleep. When you're exercising, when you're putting your body under load, when you're moving, even if it's just, I saw a video today from Thomas DeLore, I forget how you say his name, but you can YouTube him and you'll see him come up. just by, fidgeting or shaking your foot or moving your hands or whatever. If you're a fidgeter and your parents yell at you, or let go of that, because you can burn exponentially more calories than just sitting still and not moving. It is one of the easiest ways to burn fat if you're at your desk or if you're in an isolated state. I use a couple of tools myself. I'll show you a tool that I use. So I think a lot of people laugh because they think those like ab vibrator things are from the 90s were like hilariously funny, but I do use an ab belt, and this is something that I find I can wear when I'm sitting at my desk. For me personally, it's made a huge difference. I can put it on and wear it while I'm typing something, while I'm researching, while I'm reading, and while I'm brushing my teeth, whatever. Maybe not dialed all the way up to a 10, but what it does is it sends these shock waves through your muscles, and I find that it works for me, like aesthetically, if nothing else. It's made a difference for me. So there are ways that you can get exercise sitting in your chair. I don't think anything replaces going to the gym and doing strength training and resistance training, some cardio. I think all of those are really important, but there are ways while you're not in the gym to also be creatively burning. Because for me, I only go 3 days a week, and so the other 4 days a week, I can wear something like that, or I can move around and fidget or do other creative things. So how does that move into sleep? Well, if you've worked your body hard, you're going to be more tired. Also, muscle protein synthesis or muscle synthesis, the process of muscles being created, as far as I understand, occurs at night. Fat loss occurs at night. So getting a good night's sleep is really important. And for me, this has been really hard this past year. In terms of my friends who I compare sleep quality with, I'll get a long amount of sleep. That's not a problem for me. But my quality of sleep is low. Either I'm awake a lot, so if you look at your Apple Watch, you'll see like the red, I'll be awake a lot, or what I'm more concerned about is deep sleep. My hypothesis, and I don't, there's been research on all of these things, but I believe that deep sleep is probably one of the most critical processes to one of the most critical components of sleep, if you will. I assume that probably muscle protein synthesis, some important part of it probably happens during deep sleep. I also believe that there is this process of spinal fluid that comes up and kind of goes over the brain to wash out things, presumably amyloid plaques and things that could potentially cause Alzheimer's while you sleep. And so, not that amyloid plaques are tied, they are tied to Alzheimer's, but they don't know if it's they're at the scene of the crime or if they're the cause. I think they're moving away from this idea that they are the cause. But anyway, my point in saying any of this is sleep is really important, and the quality of sleep is really important. So my one friend in particular always gets like 6 hours, and I usually get 8 or 9, which is a lot. But my 8 or 9, I'll get 50 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes of deep sleep, and I don't think that's good. Where my friend, on the other hand, will get an hour and a half in his 6 hours of sleep, so way higher percentage of deep sleep. And I'll notice when I do get deep sleep, I feel much more sleep satiated, if you will. So tracking this with an Apple Watch or a Whoop or whatever, I think is really important. And yeah, so those are like the high level like biohacking tips that I have for you guys. We can go deeper into them in the next video. If there's any of them you want me to touch on more, put it in the comments below and I'll try to get to those. All right, hope this helps.